Hello, and welcome to the first of CACI's Cost of Living podcasts that we are planning on producing every month in the coming months. So thank you for joining. And yeah, the reason why we're doing this is during COVID, many of you were probably following our weekly updates that were trying to give an impartial view on what was happening on the movement of people and how it was impacting the COVID pandemic, was impacting different consumer groups. Well, we're now hopefully through the worst of COVID, but obviously cost of living is now a major issue. And we wanted to use the authority that we have from the various data sets that we have to cast a light on what is really happening. Because there are loads of other data sets out there, lots of headlines, but what is actually really going on? So we are, through these sort of regular updates, going to try to focus on who is really being impacted, where is being impacted, how it will impact your organizations, and where should your businesses start to intervene and to make changes. So the way that we're doing that is we're bringing 4 different data sets to this. The first of them is our cost of living quarterly surveys. Secondly is we are tracking transaction data that we have access to. Thirdly, we're running scenarios using our Paycheck disposable income model to see what we think will be the future. And also we'll be updating our expenditure forecasts very regularly as things go through. So I probably should have introduced myself at the beginning. I'm Paul, and I work in our location intelligence group, working with a range of clients ranging from leisure organizations through to public sector and local authorities. So I am joined by Hannah. Hannah, feel free to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Paul. So yes, I'm Hannah. I'm a senior consultant at CACI. I work in the property group, and we essentially work with landlords all across the UK and overseas as well, trying to help them with their kind of strategic decision making, making spaces better, more desirable, and I guess from a commercial angle, trying to make sure that people spend as much money as possible, which is why the cost of living crisis is an interesting one in that universe, I guess. The cost of living having, impacted everything around us really, really quickly. I mean, Aldi was full the other day when I was going on my grocery shop, and I saw that M&S was slightly less full, just anecdotally, purely from kind of walking around. But yeah, we've had lots of questions from clients. How is this going to affect us? What's this going to mean for my particular consumer? And I think that, that's what we're about to talk about, but I think it's a really, really interesting and important topic to stay on top of.
Thanks, Hannah. And as we've just done this latest survey, do you want to unpack what we've been finding?
Yeah, absolutely. So CACI ran a big consumer national panel, basically to understand right at the beginning of this crisis, how are people feeling? What are people thinking that they're going to be doing in the future in terms of cutting spending, etc. And I think it'll be interesting to see what is observed further down the line. But for now, we've got intentions and a little bit of already what people are doing. I guess firstly, we asked people whether people were worried, whether it was on people's radars, and what we found was that nationally 56% of people are really, really concerned, and a further 44% of people are worried about their family's finances, if not for their own. So you can just see the scale of kind of how worried people are, and I think that's only going to grow. It's not moving from our media headlines anytime soon, I don't think, and I don't fully think that it's impacted our wallets yet. I think it's starting to, and people are starting to talk about it, starting to feel it in their kind of daily shops, but we'll continue to see that get worse, I think, before it gets better. Interestingly, that worry about how it's going to affect me personally is varied massively by regionally still at the moment, and again, I imagine that will level out over time, because as we know, it is going to impact everyone to some degree. But what we found was the further away from London you get, the more worried people are. So Northern Ireland being at the top of that list, 73% of people were worried in Northern Ireland, by contrast with 55% of Londoners. So it's interesting seeing those regional variations in that. We actually pulled some data a couple of months ago on how much different things cost in different regions, and actually the nuance of that varies massively. for example, in the West Midlands, they pay the highest childcare in the country, aside from London, but some of the lowest on water. So you can see how, depending on what's going to change when, the percentages of each of these different types of goods that we need, it's going to have a huge impact regionally, but very, very nuanced, which is really interesting. I think another one that we found, so we've been tracking this for a couple of months now, and I think initially the first panic move that people made was, right, I'm going to stop using so much energy at home, and that's the kind of immediate crisis action people have taken. And then we saw a lot of noise in the media a couple of weeks ago about people cancelling subscriptions and those kind of Netflix, Spotify type monthly expenditures that maybe people think, I don't need this at the moment if my wallet is squeezed. The next thing people are wondering about is going out, socializing, eating out, and how that cut is going to manifest itself is interesting. Some people said, I'm just going to do it less frequently. Some people just said, I'm going to go to cheaper options. And some people said, I'm going to cut it altogether. And there was a huge variation of that by the type of person. So everyone said that they were going to try and cut back on kind of socializing expenditure, but that was very, very high amongst middle-aged groups that you'd imagine have young children at home, family groups who we already know are going to be the hardest squeezed by some of this stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening, and as I said, these are kind of reported changes rather than actual changes, and we're going to know a lot more about that as we continue to monitor it over the next couple of months. But yeah, lots of stuff happening.
Yeah, and I think that point you make around we're going to be tracking this, and yeah, we're not going to show it today, but the transactional data we have set up behind the scenes, we've got a baseline. We are going to be tracking the types of products people are spending on, their average transaction values, the types of centres they're going to, and the brands that they're going to. And yeah, we've got that baseline now. Will it be that people are trading down to different brands? We're seeing some evidence on, and am I right in the data that people say that they will? But yeah, can we actually see that really happening? And yeah, is it that actually we've seen in past recessions that potentially people start spending more on sort of luxuries in the likes of an M&S because they might choose to do that rather than going out for a meal. But yeah, it will be different people being affected in different ways. And I think the important thing that we want to bring is backing this up with data rather than just having those headlines.
Absolutely. So, I think,
yeah.
Sorry, you just reminded me of something that I was talking to with someone recently. So the dine-in for two M&S, that was a product of the last recession. So that's where that emerged from. So your point around kind of trading up, but within the realms of possibility is definitely, yeah, I think something we'll see a lot more of.
Yeah, and it's about trying to steer clients to make those right decisions of, yeah, this is a time to put the right messaging out to the right groups of people to ensure that you can keep those customers happy and keep them having what they need at this time. Okay, and as well as doing the survey and the transactional data all set up for us to monitor going forward, we've also built a little scenario tool that enables us to predict what we think is going to happen based on how prices are changing and potentially salaries are changing in the months ahead. As the basis of that, we have used our latest version of Paycheck disposable income model, which gives postcode level expectations of what people really have to spend, not their incomes, but both their incomes, looks at their major outgoings and what is left after that. So it's a bit of a scenario tool, and yeah, we have to start from somewhere with some assumptions. So I'm just going to put a little slide up on the screen. This is the tool that we've set up. It's got a little front end here that we can change what we think is going to be the rises or hopefully some of the falls as time goes on and we continue to monitor it. So for example, let's start on the big scary one. Despite what's already happened up to now, we've already covered that in our base set, until the Chancellor stepped in recently, and we'll come to that in a minute, we were expecting to see gas and electricity bills to go up a further 40% this year. For food and for clothing, I've worked on the assumption that they're going to rise with inflation at the level that it currently is. We'll be monitoring this as it goes forward, and we might change these in future podcasts, I've assumed that incomes are going to go up by 3%, which is, I've done a lot of reading on this, and that's what we're basing the current assumption on, and we've applied those assumptions through pensions. Travel to work, we're expecting to go up considerably, not just through fuel prices, but also through public transport costs. So you can argue against some of these assumptions. If you want to give me a call, I'm very happy to go through where the assumptions came from. And yeah, I've looked through an awful lot of ONS figures to support me in this. But what we can do is we can then see what is likely to happen. So many of you are already probably aware of Acorn, so I'm not going to do the big sort of technical explanation. But in short, at the top, the most affluent group, lavish lifestyles; at the bottom, difficult circumstances. So this left-hand chart here is working on the assumption that those assumptions that I just made actually happen. And what we can see here is the average household will be losing £212 this year out of their wallets effectively through the rising costs. So you could argue £212, is that a lot? Is it a small amount? It very much depends on who you are. But what is more concerning here is that at the bottom, it is the lowest income groups, and particularly struggling estates, who we think, given the fact that more of their outgoings go on the essentials like basic foods and energy costs, they could be seeing as much as £600 less in their wallets. Major concern for these groups. But interestingly, those at the top look as though even groups A and B may even see a potential increase in their disposable incomes, because if we do see salary rises, these will offset the relatively small proportion of their income that goes out on essentials. Okay, but at CACI we don't like talking about averages. That's why we break things down into Acorn groups. But what we also don't like is even just averages at Acorn group level. So look at the slightly busier slide on the right hand side, and you can see how it is going to affect people in much more detail. So if we start at the top of the groups, the majority of the highest income groups will see a relatively low impact. We're seeing by far the biggest bar here in those groups that are going to see a drop of less than 1.5%. But further down here, where you get much brighter colors, that is where we are seeing big falls potentially in people's percentage of their disposable income, which could have serious impacts on their outgoings. But that was the scenario before the Chancellor stepped in. So let's change those assumptions. And what I've done for the next slide is I've worked on the assumption that everybody receives the £400 fuel rebate that has been proposed, and the lowest 8 million or so households in the bottom 5, I think it is, Acorn groups, all get the extra payment. So watch the change and watch the colors. Actually, you didn't need to watch the change because I put them side by side. So this is what we saw if there was no gas and electricity rebate. Quite a lot of multiple colors, particular concerns at the lowest income level. This is what I've called the mini budget package that I just described. So in summary, as a result of what the Chancellor has done, it looks like those at the top of the tree, whilst there are a small number that are going to see some impact on their incomes, these guys look as though they're doing reasonably well. What we've got in here, the comfortably off, comfortable communities in the middle, yeah, the majority seem to do okay, but obviously a significant group seeing a fall in their income of between 1.5% and 3%, some seeing a fall of about 5%. We've also got some of these lower income groups, so striving families, poorer pensioners and young hardship, who we have to be concerned for this significant group here that are seeing a fall in income, but the majority are not seeing a major decline in their incomes now as a result of that mini budget package. And again, it's far better than the situation that we saw before that happened. But we do still see three considerable groups here. So the struggling estates and difficult circumstances, so the lowest income, will be seeing significant drops of income. More than 50% will see a fall of 1.5% or more. We've also potentially got a squeezed middle group. So these are the ones who are likely to be just above that threshold for getting the extra funding, and they are seeing significant drops as well. It's better than it was in the baseline scenario, but they could be squeezed a little bit. And then, potentially a little bit more surprising, the city sophisticates group up here, we're seeing that potentially these could be facing quite difficult times as a result of the fact that a lot of this group are likely to have significant rental outgoings that could, and particularly this group are found in a lot in sort of London and other city centres, where potentially they could be squeezed as a result of the extra costs, putting even more pressure on their high rental payments. So, in short, what we're seeing here using Paycheck Disposable is that different groups will definitely see different impacts, that the impact could be considerable for some of them, but whether you think the Chancellor did the right thing or not, it has seemingly made quite an impact on some of these groups. Whether he should have done more, whether he should have done less, I'll leave that to your politics to decide. But we will be tracking this as we go forward. If new policies come in, if new rates of inflation occur, if new minimum wage allowances take place, we can retune this and start to help you to understand how you might need to be sort of focusing which groups of customers might need a little bit more support for you. So I will stop sharing that slide now, if I can press the right button. And
Thanks,
back
Paul.
over to you. Yeah.
That's really interesting, and actually it really kind of aligns with additional survey stuff that we found, where young people are by far the most concerned about the cost of living, and the groups that you've just highlighted there as the ones that will see those biggest income squeezes are the youngest groups. So actually they tie in together pretty well, despite the fact that it's not the happiest of stories. Interesting what you're saying about the rents as well. I've been reading a lot of interesting news articles about what renters' lives are like at the moment. We've seen a lot of kind of rents being bolstered up, tenants being evicted if they can't pay 50% more than they were paying the previous month, etc. So yeah, I can see how all of that ties in to your predictive model, and it all makes sense. We'll leave it there for today. Covered a lot. Thank you, Paul, and thank you to anyone that's listened to this. We're going to do this again next month. We'll cover a slightly different theme, but it will all be under the umbrella of cost of living, and it's all with the intention of hopefully casting some light and some of our insights on how this is going to impact various different sectors going forward, how it's going to impact different people, and how we can move forward, and how we can, I guess, be proactive in trying to mitigate the situation regardless of what businesses we are working for and with. So yes, thank you.
Thank you.